Good evening and welcome to Byju's. I am Basavaraj. So we'll be continuing the ecology and environment, what we have continued on Friday. Right? So we'll wait for another minute or so and then we'll start. Hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all, right? Just confirm that I'm audible as well as visible. Done. Done. Okay. So last week, that is Friday, we made an effort in understanding definition of ecosystem, some concepts, that is the two things which are exchanged in the ecosystem. One is the energy and second one is the matter. And matters or the nutrients, they are always recycled in the ecosystem where the decomposers play an important role, whereas the energy always travels in the straight line, that is in the sequential part. It is unidirectional and non-cyclic. Unidirectional and non-cyclic. So these are the two things which you should remember in the context of the exchange, or what we say interaction in the ecosystem. Apart from that, we also made an effort in understanding the two terms called as bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Now, the moment when you say bioaccumulation and biomagnification, you should remember that these two terms are when the pollutant enters into the food chain, we refer that as bioaccumulation. That is pollutant entering into food chain. Pollutant entering into the food chain. That is the first species where it enters. And it is accumulation of the pollutant in the species. Accumulation of the pollutant in the species. We refer that as bioaccumulation. Now, this species is eaten by higher level, that is primary consumer, then secondary consumer, then the tertiary consumer. So in this case, the pollutants is transferred from one level to next level. So along with the transferring of the pollutants, the concentration of pollutant also increases. So you should remember two terms here. One is the transfer of the pollutant, to the next level, and also increasing in the concentration of the pollutant, increasing in the concentration of the pollutants when it is eaten by next hierarchy. We refer that as biomagnification, bioaccumulation and biomagnification. And in that we discussed about something called as diclofenac and the vulture episode. And there I told that in the context of diclofenac, India has 9 species of vulture. And due to consumption of the diclofenac, 3 species of the vultures decreased to more than 95% of their population. The number decreased to so low that today we refer them as critically endangered species. And out of these 9 species in India, long-billed vulture, slender-billed vulture, and oriental white-black vulture. So all the 3 are classified as critically endangered species because of what we refer them as biomagnification and bioaccumulation of diclofenac. And we made an effort in understanding the steps taken by government, that is the first vulture conservation plan and the second vulture conservation plan. Now the same type of issue is associated with mercury pollution, Right. So in a bay or in a city of Japan, Japan is an island nation. So in Japan, in a city called as Minamata City, near that there is a big water body called as Minamata Bay. So in this bay, Minamata Bay, large amount of mercury pollutants entered here. Mercury pollutant entered into that bay. Bay means the water. In the Minamata of Japan. Minamata of Japan. And this mercury was consumed by the algae, then insects, and then when the fish consumed that, it entered into higher level. So this mercury entered into the food chain, and then it get transferred into higher level. And the larger fish which ate the small fish, they become contaminated with mercury pollution because of increasing of the mercury concentration, biomagnification or bioamplification. Now this contaminated fish, when it was consumed by human beings, then it created a sort of neurological disorder. It created a sort of neurological disorder. Or nervous system disease. And this neurological disorder or nervous system disease, which is seen in the people, we refer that as Minamata disease. We refer this as Minamata disease. And remember, this Minamata disease is due to the consumption of the fish which is polluted with mercury, And even today, any human being who is having any type of disease accompanied by mercury pollutant, we refer that as Minamata disease. So it is a pollution due to higher concentration of the mercury in the fish. So that's why generally when you visit to the hospitals, a pregnant woman, when it visits to the hospitals, doctor advises the pregnant woman not to eat the shark or big fish. Why? Because there is possibility that these big fishes like shark or big species, they can be contaminated by the pollutant. So generally in the hospitals, the doctors always advises the pregnant woman not to eat the higher order fish like the kingfish or shark fish, which can be contaminated with mercury. And we have something which is associated with the consumption of mercury and controlling the mercury part. And that we will see when we take up the pollutant and the conventions in that regard. Minamata Convention, Minamata perspectives. So this is something associated with the mercury pollutant. So this is also the classical example of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Minamata disease. Right. Now, next in the series is levels of organization in ecology. Now, what do you mean by levels of organization? It is increasing in the hierarchy from smaller to bigger version. We refer that as increase in the hierarchy. Small to bigger version. Now it always starts with individual. Individual means single species. Individual, a single species. Now when we see the variety of that, we refer them as the population. So bigger than individual is population. And this population is also referred as species. If you take an example of dog, so dog is an individual. Breeds of dogs are referred as population. I'm repeating, dog is an example. Dog is an example of individual. Breeds of dog, we refer them as species or population. Both are same. Species or population, both are same. Now here you should remember one important aspect. The species or population, they are always dynamic in nature. They are dynamic in nature. Species can increase or species can decrease. Both possibilities are there. Now, how the species increases? They increases either by birth or immigration, when many species enters into that area. Many species enters into that area. We refer that as immigration. Immigration. Now, the species population can also decrease. What is the reason for decreasing of the population? The reason is either due to death or sometimes these species, they leave their area and move on to some other areas. Maybe due to pollution, maybe due to variation in the climate, or maybe due to unavoidable circumstances. We refer that as migration. We refer that as migration. When they leave their area and reach to some other places, we refer that as migration. Right. So when we say the population, it is very dynamic in nature. So all the varieties of the individuals are referred as the population or species. So when we say all the breeds of dogs are referred as the population here. All the varieties of the dogs are referred as species or population. Is that clear? Now, along with that, when we talk about community, when you want to say an example, all the varieties of dogs, all the varieties of cats, all the varieties of rats, all the varieties of human beings, etc. So we refer them as community. So community is consisting of many species. Community, it consists of many species. Like dogs varieties, cats varieties, lions varieties, human beings varieties. We refer that as community. So individual, population, and community. Bigger version is called as community. It consists of many species like species of dog, species of cat, etc. We refer that as community. Now, all the three which we have discussed are living entities. Along with the living entities, if we take non-living component, then we refer that as ecosystem. So ecosystem means it talks about biotic, that is living components, plus non-living components, abiotic components. Abiotic components. So what are biotic components here? The dogs, the rats, the cats, all green leaf vegetables or green plants, we refer them as biotic components. And abiotic components, they consist of the rocks, the water, etc. So if we take biotic and abiotic combined, then we refer that as the ecosystem. We refer that as ecosystem. And the bigger version of ecosystem is referred as biome. When this ecosystem bigger version is taken, we refer that as biome. Right. So biotic means living components. Biotic means living components. Living components. Abiotic means non-living components. Non-living components like the soil, water, air, etc. We refer that as abiotic components. Now, the bigger version of this is referred as biomes. So when I take biodiversity, I'll explain biome in detail. And all these are the part of the biosphere. All these are the part of biosphere. Right. So this is called as the levels of organization. It always starts with individual. Bigger than individual is referred as the species or population. Bigger than population is community. different species in that. Then ecosystem, living and non-living part. Then bigger than ecosystem is biome, and biome is a part of biosphere. So we refer them as the levels of organization, starting from individual up to the bigger versions, the biosphere. Is it clear? Now don't get much confused about this. So remember, individual, species, community, and all the communities are included in the ecosystem. And the bigger version of ecosystem is biome. Right? Next, we move on to ecological niche. Now, what do you mean by ecological niche? Now, in a very simple term, ecological niche means, see, in the first class itself, I told, environment is the physical space where the living and non-living species are there. In the first class itself, I told, the living space in which the biotic and abiotic are there, the physical space in which the biotic and abiotic components are there, that physical space is referred as environment. Please refer that second slide of your PPT. Right now, ecological niche. The moment when we say ecological niche is nothing but it talks about the complete profile of the organism. It gives the complete profile of organism or complete data of the organism. Complete data of organism, any organism which we are talking. Now, what this data consists of? This data consists of its residence, that is habitat. Its habitat or where it stays. Habitat means its residence, where it stays. Second one is it consists of its occupation, what it does. It consists of occupation, that is what it does. That is whether it is a herbivore, whether it is omnivore, or whether it is carnivore, whether it is consumer, or whether it is predator, or whether it is prey. So it talks about its occupation. So it talks about habitat and it talks about its occupation. Third one is it also talks about what it does in the environment, what it does in the ecosystem or biosphere. It means what it performs in the ecosystem. So when you take all these criteria, we refer that as ecological niche of organism. Ecological niche of organism, which gives a complete profile of that particular organism, where it stays, whether in the desert area or whether in the grassland area or whether in the forest area or whether it is staying in the ocean. So it gives its habitat, it gives its occupation, what it performs, what it eats, and how it does its activity in the ecosystem. So hence it is referred as the functional position or the role of organism in the ecosystem. Habitat means its residence. Habitat means its residence, where it stays. Where it stays. Right. So hence ecological niche consists of its dwelling place. Any word you can use. Dwelling place. Dwelling means where it stays. It can be grassland, it can be desert, it can be forest area. We refer that as habitats. Then activity pattern of the organism, whether it is decomposer, whether it is primary consumer, whether it is secondary consumer. So it gives some idea whether it is a producer or whether it is consumer, etc. Then resources, what it obtains from the habitat. Resources means whether it is eating plants or whether it is eating some other animals there. So we refer that as the ecological niche. Right. So we refer that as ecological niche. So the moment when you are reading ecological niche, it means that it gives a complete idea about that particular organism, where it stays, what it eats, what it does, and how it performs in the ecosystem, whether it is a producer, whether it is a consumer, or whether it is a detrivore, or whether it is a decomposer. So all the data are defined when you read the ecological niche. Now, along with this ecological niche, we come across certain important perspectives. We come across certain organisms. Take an example of buffalo. Take an example of cow, goat, etc. So these organisms, they don't have any specific habit of eating. They're not specific about any diets. They can eat any type of grass. They can eat any type of grass. And they can survive in any type of environmental conditions which is suitable for them. So they can survive where they are having large habitats for them. Survive where they are having large habitats. So they are not very specific about their diets. We refer them as generalists. Generalist. But there are some species which are very specific about their diet. They are very specific about their diet and very specific about their habitat. They can't eat something different than what it is mandatory for them. And their habitat is also very much limited. Their residence is something limited. An example of that, if you take panda. So this panda eats only bamboo leaves. It eats only bamboo leaves. And it is confined to the China and the surrounding regions. So we refer that as very specific in the diet. It eats only bamboo leaves. Apart from bamboo leaves, it do not eat any other greeneries. And its habitat is confined to China and neighboring regions. After that, they have been transferred to some other regions, but its natural habitat is confined to China and the neighboring areas. So this is about the panda. Another example is the koala bear. And this koala bear is confined to the Australian eastern part. It is confined to Australia. And this koala bear eats only eucalyptus leaves. It eats only eucalyptus leaves. It do not eat anything different. So hence they are very specific in their diets, and their habitats are also very restricted. Confined to smaller areas. Such types of organisms where they are very specific in their diet, where their habitats are restricted, we refer them as narrow ecological niche. Narrow ecological niche. And these narrow ecological niche, they always have a threat of extinction, because what happens if entire bamboo finishes or empties? Then panda cannot survive. What happens if entire eucalyptus ends up in that habitat? They can't survive. So these species which are having narrow ecological niche, they always have a threat of extinction. That means without that, they can't survive. But if you take the example of cow, buffalo, goat, etc., so they can survive in varieties of habitats, variety of grasses, and we refer them as broad ecological niche. So these are referred as broad ecological niche, which can survive in any type of grasses, which have many options for their survival. We referred as the broad ecological niche. See, when you talk about the pandas are confined to China and part of Asia, China and surrounding areas. That is their habitat. And when you take the koala, so these koala are confined to the eastern part of Australia and small areas of New Zealand. More specifically, we say they are confined to the eastern part of Australia and they depend on eucalyptus leaves. That means their food is also specific, their habitat is also restricted. And these species, they always have the threat. So this is an area of panda. Sorry, this is an area of koala. Endemic to this. And this is area of panda, endemic to China and neighboring parts. So these are referred as broad and narrow ecological niche. Now the idea is the moment if the environmentalists they find any species is having a narrow ecological niche, so it means that these species which are having a narrow ecological niche, they need to have more protection and conservation. So hence they need more protection and conservation. More protection and conservation. If not, they will be having major threat of existence. Right. So this is something called as broad and narrow ecological niche. So whatever I have discussed here, this is called as narrow ecological niche. Is it clear? Okay. So broad ecological niche, they are generalist, and when we talk about the narrow ecological niche, they are referred as specific in their diet. Specific in their diets. Okay. Now, along with that, understand one more concept. So this is very simple, broad and narrow ecological niche. Understand one more perspective of that. If there is an ecosystem A, this is an ecosystem A, right? In this ecosystem A, there is a resources. Resources means it talks about food, it talks about habitat, it talks about the water, etc., which are required for their survival. If any ecosystem, these resources are limited. If the resources are limited, if any ecosystem, when the resources are limited. So in this case, two species, they can be of same breed or they can be of different one. Two species, they will never coexist. They will never coexist. They always fight for their survival. They always compete for their survival. They always compete for the ecological niche. Compete for the ecological niche. That is, compete for food, compete for habitat, compete for water, etc. They always compete for ecological niche. And this competition can be within the same type of species. Example, it can be between the two dogs. The competition can be between the two dogs. So two dogs are same species. So when the two dogs compete for the food habitat and all, we refer that as intra-specific. We refer that as intra-specific. That is, same two species fighting for that. Intra-specific. Or sometimes the competition may be between a dog and a fox. Sometimes it can be one dog and one fox, which can compete for the same type of resources. And we refer that as interspecific. Two different species are fighting for the limited resources. Interspecific. Interspecific. Yes, birds can also be. Birds can also be. I'm giving an example. It can be bird, it can be any type of animal, any bird, any animal. So they will not share their habitat. They will not share their food if it is limited. If it is limited, they will never share. They always compete with each other. And the most strongest will take the ecological niche. So the weaker are replaced here. The weaker species are replaced. And the stronger will acquire the ecological niche. The stronger will acquire the ecological niche. Yes, like lion and hyena, any species. And we refer this as a principle called as competition exclusion principle. So this is called as competition exclusion principle, or it is also referred as Gauss law. He classified that in detail. It is called as Gauss law, or it is also referred as Grinnell's axiom. Grinnell's axiom. All the three are the same. All the three are the same, right? So competition exclusion principle, Gauss law, or Grinnell's axiom. So these are something which you should remember. These are something which you should remember. So two species cannot occupy the same ecological niche. Two species cannot occupy the same ecological niche. So hence it is very difficult. Hence it is a major concern when you make introduction of one species to another habitat. When you introduce one species to another habitat, they will not welcome that. They will always be having competition. So it has to survive with the competition in that area. So that's why if you have seen about the introduction of cheetahs in Kunapulfur, so they were not welcomed. So they have to fight with the native habitants there, and they have to establish their ecological niche. So that's why many species, many cheetahs, they got injured when they were attacked by the species which were surrounding in that areas. So it is not easy for them to locate them. So this is called as the competition exclusion principle, or we refer that as Gauss law or Grinnell's axiom. Very important perspectives. Right. Next, we talk about the ecological relationships within the organisms. Within the organisms. In the Now this types of ecological relations, they can be positive as well as negative. So they can be positive and they can also be negative when we take the consideration of the two species. Positive means they benefit each other. Negative means they harm one species. So they can be positive type of relation or negative type of relationships. In all the ecosystems, we always find they can be either beneficial or losses one. So among the positive type, we take some examples. The first one is mutualism. Now, in the context of mutualism, understand that the classical example of mutualism is the relationship between algae, zooxanthellae, and polyp. Generally, we refer them as the coral. So, in this, the symbiotic relationship is between the two species, that is algae called as zooxanthellae and the polyp. So both benefit each other. Algae and polyp both benefit each other. And due to presence of algae, the corals have colors. And this type of relationship, we refer that as mutualism. Mutualism, where both benefit each other and both exist in the presence of each other. Both exist in presence of each other. In presence of each other. So it means that if algae leaves the coral, or if algae leaves the polyp, then the coral will become white. We refer that as coral bleaching. We refer that as coral bleaching. Such type of relationships, we refer them as mutualism. We refer that as mutualism. Is it clear? So always remember, in the context of positive, the first one is mutualism, where presence of both the species are important. Presence of both the species are important for their survival. The classical example is the relationship between the polyp or coral and zooxanthellae. Both survive in their presence of each other. And the second type of relationship is what we refer them as proto-cooperation. And here it is an example between crocodile and bird. Now both will get benefit from each other. Both will get benefit. And their survival depends without their presence also. They can survive without the presence of other. They can survive without the presence of other. Now here, the bird sits on the, or sits in the mouth of crocodile. So this bird will eat the parasites, which gives the crocodile relief from the parasites. Relief from the parasites. And in turn, the bird will get the food. The bird will get the food. So such types of benefits is referred as proto-cooperation. Another classical example of proto-cooperation is the cattle and the bird. Another example is the cattle and the bird. So cattle can survive without the bird also, and bird can survive without the cattle also. But when the cattle sits on the back of the bird, when the bird sits on back of the cattle, it will eat the insects there. So the cattle will get relief from the insects and the bird will get the food, but they are not mandatory for their survival. So such types of relationships, we refer that as proto-cooperation. Proto-cooperation, right? Now, when we talk about this in geography, you have studied that the symbiotic relationship between the corals and the algae. So algae provides food as well as color to the corals. Algae provides food as well as color to the corals, and the corals provides physical support. Corals provide physical support as well as nutrients to the algae. Without the physical support, where does the algae will be standing? So hence it is give and take relationship between the corals and the zooxanthellae. Is it clear? So such types of relations, we refer them as proto-cooperation and mutualism. Is it clear? Now, next is commensalism. So commensalism is also referred as positive type of relationship. Now, this is something where one species get the benefit, the other species is not harmed nor get any benefit. Example, you can take the small crustaceans called as barnacle. Small crustaceans. So these are barnacles, small crustaceans. Small crustaceans. They are get attached to the whale. They get attached to the whale. Now, wherever the whale is moving, along with that, these barnacles will also move along the whale. And these barnacles will get the food. So these barnacles get the food when they move along with the whale. whale. But the whale do not get any benefit, nor it is harmed. Whale has no benefit, or it is not harmed. It is not harmed by the presence of barnacle. So such type of relationship, we refer that as commensalism, where one organism gets benefit while the other organism is neither helped or nor harmed. And here the organism which get benefit is barnacle, and the organism which is neither harmed nor helped is whale, is referred as whale. This is one example. Then parasitism. Parasitism is referred as negative type of relationship. It is a negative type of relationship, where one species gets benefit, the other species is harmed. One species gets benefit, the other species is harmed. Other species is harmed. Barnacle is a crustacean. Crustacean means small species. It is not a plant. It is crustacean, like crab, etc. Crustacean, skeleton, and small animal. Parasitism. One get benefit and one is harmed. Example, mosquito biting human beings. So mosquito gets benefit, and the human beings, they all have many types of issues when the mosquito bites them. So human beings are harmed here. Human beings are harmed here. And the species which is harmed, we refer them as the host. The species which is harmed here, we refer them as the host. And the species which get benefit is referred as parasite. Is referred as parasite. Is it clear? So we refer that as parasitism. Always remember, one gets benefit, the other species is harmed. The species which is harmed, maybe it can be mosquito or maybe any flies, right? So it can be a disease causing, which can create the disease like malaria, dengue, etc. to the human beings. Is it clear? So we refer that as parasitism, negative type of relationship. Then next is predation. So predation is also referred as hunting, or it is also referred as killing. Example, the relationship between the leopard and deer. Now the animal which is hunted, is referred as prey, and the animal which hunts, which kills, is referred as predator. Which hunts or which kills is referred as predator. So here leopard is predator. Yes, the same term, the same. In the turtles also we find the barnacles, right? But if the number of barnacles increases in the turtles, then they can harm the turtles. But when you take the shape of or the size of whale, it is very large, so they are not harmful. So hence the relationship between barnacle and turtle is not referred as beneficial one. So when we talk about the relationship between barnacle and the turtle, is not commensalism. Please understand, it is the relationship between the whale and the barnacle. The size of whale is very, very big, but the relationship between the turtle and barnacle is not commensalism. Is it clear? So remember this: predation, hunting, and killing. Right. Now competition. Now the moment when you say competition, as I told that there is always a competition between the two species for habitat, for food, or for their occupation, which is referred as competition exclusion principle, or we refer that as Gauss law. So hence there is always a competition between the two species or between the same type of species. Now if it is for resources, then we refer that as consumptive or exploitative. If it is for territory, then we refer that as interference. And if it is for new territory by arriving the first. We refer them as primitive. We refer them as primitive. So these can be asked in match the following. Match the following. Is it clear? This is something which you should remember. Consumptive or exploitative. Don't take in-depth analysis. They may ask in the prelims. So what is competition? What is consumptive or exploitative? What is interference or what is preemptive? So it is for resources. Resources means it can be about the food. It can be about water. Territory means habitation, right? So we refer that as competition. We refer that as competition, right? Then next is B and C. B means for territory. Right. So when we say the preemptive means new territory by arriving first in that areas. Right. Now, amensalism. Amensalism means presence of one species has a negative effect on another, but the first species is unaffected. First species is unaffected. Now, this is a classical example of elephant, that is herds of elephants. Herds means group of elephants. Group of elephants. Group of elephants. When they walk on the grasslands, elephants, when they walk on the grasslands or the grasses. Now, what happens? Grasses get destroyed when they walk on the grasslands. So, these grasses, they are destroyed. So, one species is destroyed. The presence of one species have a negative effect on another. But what happens to the elephant? Elephant will not have any impact. The first species elephant is unaffected. Elephant is unaffected. Is it clear? So this is called as amensalism. This is called as amensalism. Now, when we talk about preemptive, for new territory by arriving first. So generally, when I take ecosystem or ecological succession, there I will explain. It is pioneer species. Any species which enters into the first, we refer them as preemptive. We refer them as preemptive. Right. So these are the types of relationships which are seen in the context of ecosystem. Okay. Now, hibernation, brumation, and estivation. Now, what do you mean by hibernation, brumation, and estivation? So what exactly they talk about? So this is something called as adaptation. Hibernation, brumation, and estivation. It is a mode of adaptation. It is mode of adaptation, which is done by organism. Which is done by organism in extreme weather conditions. Extreme weather conditions. Like high temperature, low temperature, etc. Extreme weather condition. Right. Now, whenever such types of conditions are there, when the temperatures are high or when the temperatures are low, so they always make an adaptation. How? By entering into the state of dormancy. They enter the state of dormancy. Enter the state of dormancy. Now, what do you mean by entering the state of dormancy? So they stop their growth, development, and physical activity. They stop their growth, physical activity, right? They stop their growth, physical activity, and development. So it means they reduce their heartbeat and respiration. They reduce their heartbeat and respiration. Very low. Very low. They reduce their heartbeat and respiration. Why? To conserve the energy. To conserve the energy. And we refer that as the state of dormancy. the physical activity, growth and development is stopped. They reduce their heartbeat. So generally, their heartbeats and their respiration decreases to more than 80%. They reduces their heartbeat and respiration to more than 80%, sometimes even 90% also, so that they can conserve their energies during extreme weather conditions. Now, such type of dormancy, if it is done during the winter season, we refer that as winter sleep. We refer that as hibernation. And if the same type of adaptation, which is done by reptiles, is referred as brumation. So please understand this. Hibernation and brumations are the adaptability in the context of cold conditions or winter. So generally we refer them as winter sleep. So many organisms like mammals, birds, etc., many species, when they perform this during the winter season, we refer them as, even reptiles also we can find them. So we refer that as hibernation. And if the same type of dormancy, if it is performed by reptiles, then we refer that as brumation. Right. So brumation, example is bearded dragon. So this is a reptile. And hibernation by Arctic ground squirrel. This is hibernation. Polar bears, they also hibernate. They eat lot amount of food in the summer season and they hibernate during the winter season, because all the areas are covered by ice. They don't have any food to eat, and to conserve whatever they have eaten, they always reduce their activities. We refer that as dormancy. Now, there are many species which protect and conserve themselves during the summer season. So during the summer season, when the temperature is very high, many birds or many animals like earthworms, example earthworms or birds, during the summer season, they undergo the dormancy. And this summer dormancy, we refer that as estivation. So this, which is performed by the species, maybe by earthworm or by many birds, to protect themselves in the summer season, we refer this as estivation. So this is adaptation for summer condition. Summer or high temperature. And adaptation for the winter condition is called as hibernation. And if it is reptiles, then we refer that as brumation. Right. So they don't get decomposed in the soil. Is it clear? So generally in the estivation, the same thing. They reduce their breathing capacities, they reduce their heartbeat, and they survive in that condition till the environmental become favorable for them to start. Is it clear? So this is called as hibernation, brumation, and estivation. 3 terms which you should remember. Is it clear? Okay. Now, next is ecological pyramid. Now, we made an effort in understanding, do we need to learn their specific? No, not required. Only the terms are sufficient. You don't have to talk in detail about that. Right. So you can get many examples of those species. So you can remember that part. Now, ecological pyramid. So ecological pyramid is the graphical representation of the relationship between the different organisms in the ecosystem. So this ecological pyramid is referred as better than food chain. So this is referred as better than food chain. food chain, where it tries to give the relationship between the different organisms in the ecosystem, whether it is producer, primary consumer, or secondary consumer. So we have studied that in the ecological relationship, that is food chain and food web. So where I told that producers are there, primary consumers, secondary consumers, they all are represented by tropics. They all are represented by tropics. And there we studied something called as energy and all those parameters in the food chain. And this is something better than the food chain. So hence we say it is better than the food chain, which gives the graphical representation between the different organisms and their relationships. And generally, when you talk about ecological pyramids, so these ecological pyramids are explained or given in detail by Charles Elton. So first time they were explained by Charles Elton. So hence sometimes we also refer them as Eltonian pyramids. So hence we also refer them as Eltonian pyramids. And always remember that in the pyramids, the producers will be at the base. In the pyramids, the producers will be at the base. Producers will be at the base. And the top consumers will be at apex. And top consumers will be at apex. So we refer them as a pyramid, which is derived from Greek word, a triangular in the structure. And these pyramids, they are of three types. Ecological pyramids are three types. One is pyramid of number. Second one is pyramid of biomass. And third one is pyramid of energy. So we always have three types of pyramids. Pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. And these pyramids can be of two varieties. It can be upright or it can be inverted. This is called as inverted pyramid. When we talk about pyramid of number, so pyramid of number can be both. It can be both upright as well as inverted. Whereas pyramid of biomass, it is also both. That is upright and inverted. That is upright as well as inverted. But if you take the pyramid of energy is always upright. It is always upright. Is it clear? So three types of pyramids: number, biomass, and energy. Now we'll take up the pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. Small introduction about them. Now the first one is pyramid of number. Now in the context of pyramid of number, only the numbers are taken into consideration. Size do not have any role. Only the numbers are taken into consideration. Only numbers are considered. Size has no role. It means that if you are talking about one rabbit, it is same as one elephant, because we are not considering the size. We are just taking the numbers. One ant is same as one elephant. Size is not taken into consideration. 10 rats, 10 lions. 1,000 grasses, 1,000 snakes. So here size has no role. Size has no role. Only the numbers are taken into consideration. So it means that one ant is equal to one elephant. One grass is equal to one tiger. So one number is equal to one number here. It means that size do not have any role. Only the numbers are taken into consideration. So hence, when we talk about the pyramid of numbers, we have the examples. The first one is referred as grassland ecosystem. In the grassland ecosystem, so remember here, we have crores of grasses, crores. Then on that, primary consumers will be there, who are in thousands in numbers. So these may be in crores. So these may be in the crores. Then the primary consumers, they may be in thousands, like the rabbits, etc. So the number decreases. I'm not talking about the size, only the numbers. And these primary consumers are fed by the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers eat them. So the secondary consumers maybe 100 there, maybe 100. And then tertiary consumers like birds, etc. So they may be 10 here. So the number decreases when you move on to the hierarchy. So such types of pyramids, we refer them as upright pyramids. So grassland ecosystem shows upright pyramid. Upright pyramid. Grassland ecosystem. Now, in contrast to that, if we take a parasitic food chain, right? So here we come across a tree, So tree is one species here, single tree. In that tree, thousands of birds will be there. And in the wings of the birds, we will have lakhs of parasites. In the birds. And within that, crores of hyperparasites. So here again, size is not important. A tree, 100 birds, but then parasites, hyperparasites. So this is called as inverted type of pyramid. So parasitic food chain shows inverted type of pyramid. That is something like this. Parasitic food chain is inverted, whereas the grassland ecosystem is upright pyramid. Now they found that this pyramid of number is not giving clarity because it does not give about consumption values. It is just giving the numbers. We can't conclude anything good from this. So hence they decided that we have to take the size into consideration. We need some more clarity on their consumption pattern. So hence the second type of pyramid was introduced, called as pyramid of biomass, which is referred as comparatively better than the pyramid of numbers. So pyramid of biomass, it is referred as better than pyramid of number, Now here size is taken into consideration. Right. So it is not one ant equals to one elephant here. Size is taken into consideration. One mosquito is not equivalent to that of the elephant here. The size is taken into consideration, right? So we refer that as pyramid of biomass, or it is based on the total biomass or dry matter at each level, or every level. It is referred as number of species into their weight. is referred as biomass. Right, number of species into their weight. If 1,000 species are there, multiply them with their weight, so that gives their biomass. Is that clear? So here size is very, very important. Size is very, very important. Right, so it is total mass of organization at each level. Total mass of organization at each level, number of organisms in that, multiply them with their weights. Is it clear? So we refer that as the pyramid of biomass. Now, here we come across two important perspectives. In the case of the grassland ecosystem, in the context of grassland ecosystem, right? So here we find grasses will be more, trees will be more, big trees will be there, grasses will also be there. Now, if we take the weight of the big trees, total weight of the grass, it will be very high. It will be very huge. Now, if you take the producers, thousands of producers will be there. And if you take the weight of those, if you take weight of those, it will be comparatively less primary consumers. And still secondary consumers, they will be less in the number. And if you take the total weight of that, again, it will be very less. So hence, in the context of grassland ecosystem, it is upright ecosystem. The pyramid of biomass is upright ecosystem. Upright. In the context of pyramid of grassland ecosystem. Now, focus on understanding the second aspect. If we take aquatic ecosystem, or if we take pond ecosystem, pond ecosystems. Now, in the ponds, we come across phytoplanktons. Many small algae are there. Crores of algae will be there. Crores of algae will be there. And what is their size? They're very tiny. Very tiny. And if you take the total weight of that, that will not be very high, because you can't see them through the naked eyes also. So the total weight of that, including the numbers also, it will be very less. It will be very less here. That is the producers. Producers, it will be less. Algae, phytoplanktons, microscopic species, they will be very less. And they are fed by the fish. We refer them as herbivores. Right? Some fish, which we refer them. Right? Or we say some insects, we refer them as zooplanktons. The size of the zooplanktons is comparatively bigger. And if you take the weight of that zooplanktons and their numbers, it will be more than what we find in the producers. So it will be more than the zooplanktons, than the producers. Then these are eaten by fish, which are referred as primary carnivores. And if you take the primary carnivores, the size of the fish is bigger, and the numbers is also more here, big size, and hence they will be having more biomass than the herbivores. Then these small fish are eaten by sharks, whales, etc., and their biomass will be comparatively higher. And hence, in the aquatic or pond ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is inverted. In aquatic ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is inverted. Now, a question to you all. If we take the same aquatic ecosystem, and in this aquatic system, if you calculate the pyramid of number, in the same aquatic ecosystem or in the same pond ecosystem, if you calculate the pyramid of number, will it be inverted or upright? Pyramid of number. Right? So it is where in the biomass, the size is taken, whereas in the numbers, the size is not taken into consideration. And the same aquatic ecosystem, the same pond ecosystem, if it is biomass, it shows inverted. But when you talk about the pyramid of number, the same becomes upright. It becomes upright. It becomes upright. Is it clear? So we refer that as the pyramid of biomass. So pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass. So two types of pyramids. Then they also found that this pyramid of number and pyramid of biomass, they are giving some data. They found pyramid of biomass is better than that of pyramid of number, but still they are not getting exact idea about the transfer of energy or the way in which the ecosystem is performing. So hence they found the third one, which is called as pyramid of energy, and this gives the best representation of the tropical relationships. Pyramid of energy. And always remember, this pyramid of energy is always upright. It is always upright. Upright. It cannot be inverted. It cannot be inverted. And it is represented by something called as the Lindemann's law or 10% rule. 10% rule. That is, only 10% of energy is transferred to the next level. Only 10% of energy is transferred to the next level. To next level. Right. It means that when you talk about rabbit, rabbit is eaten by the dog. Rabbit is eaten by the dog. Rabbit can't eat the dog. Rabbit can't eat the dog. So hence it is unidirectional. It is unidirectional. It is unidirectional. Is that clear? So please remember this. If we take pyramid of biomass for grassland area, only the grasses are there. See, when you talk about the pyramid of biomass, so here when you see grasslands, grasslands have big trees. Grasslands are big trees, and if you take the big trees mass, lakhs of trees will be there, and their weight will be very high. Right. So this you should remember. You don't have to make in-depth analysis. Just mention upright or inverted. You don't have to be very specific about this. You don't have to be very specific about this. You have to be either remembering that whether it is upright or inverted. Whether it is upright or inverted. So this is always upright. So if you remember this, that is more than sufficient. Right. So this is upright one. Is it clear? So polyp is an individual species. So in your geography you have studied. So small minute species in the oceans, we refer them as polyp. Small individual species, we refer them as polyp. And the colony of polyps is called as coral. So individually we refer that as polyp. So many polyps, when they combine, colony of polyp is referred as coral. Triangle, don't draw anything, just draw the triangle. Triangle, you can just see whether it is upright or inverted. This is more than sufficient. Right. So this is upright one. Okay. So this is something called as the pyramid of energy. And I told that always 10% of energy is C. Now, the major drawback with this pyramids, the major drawbacks with the pyramids are, the first one is while defining all the pyramids, in the pyramids, the decomposers are neglected. They are not included. So decomposers are not included. Decomposers are not included. That is the major drawback. So in all the pyramids, I have never used any term called as decomposers, whereas in the food chains, the decomposers was rare. So the decomposers are neglected in the pyramids. The second one is these pyramids can give the data about only food chains. They can't represent food webs. So they represent only food chains. Food chains, not food web. Not food web. Is it clear? So these are the drawbacks of the ecological pyramids. Now, sometimes when they ask in the prelims, so you should remember, decomposers are included in the food chain. Yes, correct. Decomposers are included in the pyramids. No. Decomposers are not included in the pyramid. So that is the major drawback of these ecological pyramids. Is it clear? And it also gives data about only food chains. It can't give the complete idea about the food webs. Right. Now, next we move on to understand a simple concept called as ecosystem services. So what do you mean by ecosystem services? What do you mean by ecosystem services? So ecosystem services, the moment when you talk about services, you should remember two things associated with that. Right. The first one is pyramids gives, see, in the first slide itself, I told graphical representation between the different organisms. They give an idea about what type of organisms we are talking, whether it is a producer, whether it is a consumer, what it is consuming, what it is taking from the ecosystem, how it is behaving in the ecosystem, what amount of energy is transferred. So it gives a complete idea about transfer of nutrients and the exchange of energy in the ecosystems. Is it clear? Okay. Now, ecosystem services. Now, when you talk about ecosystems, always remember the examples of ecosystems. So it can be agricultural field, it can be forest, it can be lake, it can be pond, etc. So we refer them as ecosystems. It can be agriculture field, it can be forest, it can be lake, it can be pond, or it can be garden. So all these are referred as the ecosystems. Now we get benefit from the agricultural field, we get benefit from the forests, we get benefit from the lakes, drinking water, etc. So all benefits we get from them. The benefits what we get from the ecosystems, we refer them as ecosystem services. The benefits which are obtained from the ecosystem to the humankind. Now, the moment when you talk about ecosystem, remember these are the examples of ecosystem: man-made or it can be natural. Man-made or it can be natural. It can be agriculture field, the small garden besides your home, big pond, Amazon forest, lake. All these are examples of ecosystem. What benefit you get from them, we refer them as ecosystem services. We refer them as ecosystem services to the humankind. This is a broader definition. But in the context of ecological answer perspectives, we classify all the benefits into two ways, that is resources and process. Now, what do you mean by resource? What do you mean by resources? Can anybody define the resources in one sentence? How do you define the resources? How do you define resources? Try. It may be wrong, but still try. How do you define resources in single statement, 2 or 3 words? Right. So resources, you are giving an example. Perfect. Things we use. So can we say that resources are something which provides economic benefits? Can we say resources are something which provides economic benefit? Yes, different. So hence we refer them as resources. Economic benefit, we refer them as resources. Now if you take the ecosystem, if you take the agriculture field, what you get benefit from the agriculture field? We get food, we get crops, etc. So it means that ecosystem has providing some economic benefit to the farmers. Food what we consume. If you take forest, now what benefit we get from the forests? What benefit we get from the forest? We say the timbers, minor products, minor products. In forest we have many medicinal plants. medicinal plants, which we get benefit from them. So these are referred as resources. Then again, if we take lake, now what you get from the lake? We get lake or river, or you say groundwater. So what you get from there? We get water for drinking. We get water, and this water can be used for drinking. This water can be used for irrigation, etc. Right. Then again, we have land resource, and from this land, construction activities can be done here. Construction activities can be done here. So these are called as the resources. Resources, what we get benefit from that, right? So we get many resources in the form of food, in the form of medicinal plants, in the form of crops, in the form of many. We come across many such species, like if you take ponds, lakes, also we have many species like the fish, prawns, etc., which we consume. So they provide protein requirement. If we take the cattle's milk from the cattle's, chickens, poultry, they provide the protein requirements. They provide the protein requirements, right? So hence these are referred as the resources what we obtain from the ecosystem. Please remember that resources means benefits. Now second one is process. Now what process we are talking about? What process we are talking about? So please focus on understanding this process. Now the process, the moment when we say many process takes place, that yes, animal form what you create is an ecosystem. It is an ecosystem. That is called as man-made ecosystem. Perfect. Anything. Now the process here is, we talk about something called as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. Now photosynthesis, when we say, so this process performs two activities. It performs two activities. The first one is it absorbs carbon dioxide. The plants, they absorb carbon dioxide, right? So the moment when they absorb carbon dioxide, we refer that as carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration. Absorb the carbon dioxide, carbon sequestration, plus they release oxygen. They release oxygen, and this oxygen is very important for our survival. We use the oxygen for breathing. We use the oxygen for breathing. And these green plants, when they absorb more carbon dioxide than what they emit back, these green plants, when they absorb more carbon dioxide than what they emit back, what are they referred as? Anything which absorbs more carbon dioxide than what it emits back, we refer them as, if you take green plants, forest areas, which absorbs more carbon dioxide in the process called as photosynthesis, we refer them as carbon sinks. We refer them as carbon sinks. So when they store large amount of this green plants, which are referred as carbon sink. Carbon sinks. So green plants or forests are referred as carbon sinks. Example, forest. Right. Now the wetlands are also there. We find oceans are there. We find certain lakes are there. Certain seas are there. On the coastal areas also we find certain green plants. And this carbon dioxide, which is stored in the coastal ecosystem, we refer that as blue carbon. So this carbon sequestration, which is done in the coastal areas, coastal ecosystems, like mangroves, we refer this as blue carbon. Blue carbon. Yes, absorption of carbon dioxide is referred as carbon sequestration. So when I take global warming and climate change, I'll explain in detail about carbon sequestration. Sequestration means absorbing of carbon dioxide. So this can be done naturally as well as mechanically also. right? So this is a natural way of absorbing carbon dioxide. So this is natural way of absorbing carbon dioxide, and hence we say it is natural carbon sequestration. We refer this as natural carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration means absorbing. Sequestration means absorbing. In a very simple way, absorbing. So when I take global warming and climate change, I'll explain that in detail. Sundarbans is an example of blue carbon. And this carbon, which is stored in the coastal ecosystems, we refer them as blue carbon. Blue carbon. Is it clear? So simple definitions. Photosynthesis, where they absorb carbon dioxide. So hence green plants or forests are referred as the carbon sinks, where they sequester carbon naturally, where they store the carbon dioxide naturally. And we refer that as natural carbon sequestration. And the one which is stored in the aquatic, we refer that as blue carbon. This is one process. Now, when they absorb carbon dioxide, are they making any impact on the environment? Are they making any impact on the climate of that region? Are they making any supporting activity in the context of the present scenarios? When you talk about green plants, are they making some regulations in the context of climatic perspectives? Yes, they reduce the greenhouse gas. So it means that they absorb carbon dioxide. It means that they are making climate regulation. Climate regulation. It means that they are reducing the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. They are reducing the greenhouse gas, more specifically carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So by which they are playing important role in reducing global warming. Perfect. Reducing global warming. Global warming. So this is called as a process. Now, a single process performs all these activities, which provides the blue carbon, which provides oxygen for survival, and which also provides the climate regulations, This is one such example. Now, the second perspective is understand here. We come across many types of organisms. Take an example of earthworm. Now, this earthworm is a burrowing animal. It digs the earth. It is burrowing animal. It digs the earth. Now, when it digs the earth, it makes the soil porous. It digs the earth, and hence it will make the soil porous. And it increases the fertility of the soil. Increase fertility of the soil. And hence earthworms are used in organic farming. And this process where the earthworms dig the soil and make the soil porous, they are referred as the natural plowers of the earth. And this process is referred as bioturbation. Now, sometimes when they ask in UPSC, you should remember that bioturbation is a process which is performed by burrowing animals like earthworms, rats, etc., where they dig the soil and they make the soil porous. And because of its porosity, the soil absorbs more water and the soil increases its fertility level. And we refer that as bioturbation. This you have read in your geography. So that is also a process which is done. And apart from that, we also use living organism in controlling pollutions. And I'll discuss that in detail. Plants and living organisms like bacteria are used. So living organisms which are used to control the pollution. And we refer this as bioremediation, like oil zappers, bacterias, the trees which are used. So we refer that as bioremediation. Bioremediation. So I'll discuss in detail when I take the pollution class. So in the pollution class, I'll discuss in detail about bioremediation. Bioremediation. So these are the certain processes which are seen as a part of ecosystem services. So hence, whenever when you're writing any answer on the services which are provided by the ecosystem, you should remember ecosystem services are the benefits what the humanity gets from the ecosystems. And all the services, we can classify them into process and resources. Resources and the process. So these are resources and these are the process. Yes, bioremediation is overlapping with the SNT, but here we are not discussing about where it is following. We are discussing about its application. The applications of bioremediations are used in controlling pollution. Is it advantage or disadvantage for humanity? Right. So it is advantage. It is advantage. Right. So that's what we are talking about. Right. Now, all the services, we can classify them into four major types. Four types. The first one is referred as provisioning services. Now, when you're writing your answers, provisioning services, they include food, fresh water, fuel wood, all these. Then second one is regulating services. So please remember these four headings: provisioning services, regulating services. Regulating means climate regulation, decreasing the disease aspect, controlling the pollution. We refer them as regulating services. Then the third one is referred as the cultural services. Cultural services. Right. So here, don't go with homeopathic medicines. Homeopathic medicines are different. We are talking about living organisms. Homeopathic medicines are different. They are derivatives. They are derivatives. We are not talking about derivatives. So they will be medicinal plants which we use them for that. So here I'm talking about using of living organisms, not the product of them. Living organisms, we refer that as bioremediation. Don't get confused. So homeopathy medicines are derivatives of that living plant. When it is removed from the plant, when it is removed from the ground, we make the byproduct of that. So byproduct of these are referred as the medicines. So I'm not discussing about the byproducts. I'm discussing about their presence and how they are used in reducing the pollution. Right. So when we talk about this is pollination. And I told they are used in even reducing pollution also. Pollination, they increase the yield. Pollution, when they are used in regulating methods. Pollination, pollution, all these words which are in the form of regulating services. Is it clear? Then cultural services. We have many religious and spiritual parts. So in present India also we find cow is worshipped. So cow is also part of ecosystem. We find banyan tree which is worshipped. So we find their place are very immense in the cultural perspectives. And apart from that, we also come across many types of sacred groves. Sacred groves. Right. So all these are very important in the context of ecosystem. Sacred groves, where the tribal peoples worship them as abode of their gods. Abode of their gods. Yes, neem tree is also something where they are having some importance in their religious perspectives, right? So we refer them as cultural services. Cultural services. Is it clear? And then supporting services. The fourth one is supporting services. And supporting services means they play an important role in soil formation, like earthworm, nutrient cycles, biogeochemical cycles, right? So these are referred as the services which are provided by the ecosystem, right? Now, when you're writing your answers in UPSC, you should remember that all the benefits what we get from the ecosystems, we refer them as ecosystem services, and we can classify them into process and resources. You define one or two process, you define one or two resource, then remember these headings. Don't miss these four names: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting. And in that, if you remember one or two names, one or two, example, food and fresh water, climate regulation, pollination, spiritual and aspirational, or soil formation or nutrients, any two, if you remember, any two from here, any two from here, any two from here also, that is more than sufficient for the evaluator to give you the good marks. Is that clear? So this is what we refer them as ecosystem services, the benefits what we get from the ecosystem, right? Now the next perspective is about small concepts linked with ecosystem services. We all get the benefits from the ecosystems, right? Now here we talk about, these are the terms, please read them: carbon sequestration, blue carbon, carbon sink, carbon footprint, bioremediation, right? So I have explained this. So carbon footprint, again I'll discuss when I take the global warming and climate change. Carbon footprint meant it is the amount of carbon dioxide which is emitted by a person, emitted by an event, emitted by any process. We refer that as carbon footprint. Amount of carbon dioxide emitted, we refer that as carbon footprint. Now these are the terms. Some terms may be new, so please read them and use them in your answer writing capacities, right? Now here we come across a term called as carrying capacity of ecosystem. Carrying capacity of ecosystem, right? Now whenever when we talk about any ecosystem, we'll just complete this carrying capacity of ecosystem, then we can have a break. Just an introduction of this, then we can have another 10 minutes, then we can have a break. Carrying capacity of ecosystem, right? Now here, whenever when we talk about any ecosystems, it will always have, say, the composition which consists of living organisms as well as non-living organisms. It means that these ecosystems, they provide services to humanity. Services to humanity, right? This is bioremediation, bioturbation, bioturbation, right? Now any ecosystem, it will always provide services. It always provides services to the community which is surviving there, or to the humanity which is there. Maximum size of the population that can be supported indefinitely by the resources what we obtain from the ecosystem. So in the beginning of the starting, I told you that increasing of the population or exploitation of the resources are there, industrialization, which are also making the impact on the ecosystem. So all the services, all the benefits which we get from the ecosystem are confined to particular strength of population. It is confined to the particular size of population. So all the benefits which are gained by particular size of population from the ecosystem, we refer that as carrying capacity of ecosystem. It is something like this: we are having a lift, and the capacity of the lift is carrying 10 people, or say 800 kg. 10 people or 800 kg. Now if 15 people enters there, or if something which is more than 800 kg enters there, will the lift perform? So this lift will not perform here if the strength increases, if the weight increases there. Now the same thing happens with the carrying capacity of ecosystem as well. So carrying capacity means the maximum size of population that can be supported indefinitely by the resources of that particular area. Now what happens if the population of that region increases? What happens when the population of that area increases? Population of that ecosystem increases. So this will make over exploitation of resources. over exploitation of resources. And it also depends on consumption values. It also depends on the consumption values. Each individual who is consuming, what we consuming from them, what we consume from them. Right? No. Always the statement is there. Earth can provides, or Earth provide the needs of humanity, but not greeds of humanity. Earth or Mother Earth always provides the needs of humanity, but not the greeds of humanity. If we are consuming what it is needed for us, then the earth can supply for us. If our greeds increases, then the earth may not be possible for the earth to supply to that. So hence, if the amount of resources what individual is consuming, say a village is there, where it is having 10,000 population. So these 10,000 populations, they depend on the village, and this village provides the resources to them continuously without any degradation. If the population of this village increases to say 1 lakh, if it increases to 1 lakh or 10 lakh, then it is called as overpopulation. So the village may not be sufficient for it to provide all the resources, all the benefits to that 10 lakh or 1 lakh population. So increasing of the population, size of the population, if it increases, then it will have an impact on the resources. Impact on resources, which will make the degradation of ecosystem, which will degrade the ecosystem. Right? Then it also depends on amount of resources which are available in the ecosystem. Resources means soil, fertile soil, the trees, the forest areas, the lakes, the waters, etc. So resources means it can be agricultural land, it can be water which can be needed for the human beings, it can be forest areas which are required for survival. Just imagine that the two activities, that is resources and process. Resources and process. Now, if the population increases, then it will create pressure on the agriculture land. Then what will happen to the agriculture land? We use more chemical fertilizers. If we use more chemical fertilizer, what will happen to the land? The land will degrade, it will lose its fertility. If the population increases, then we will start cutting more number of trees. When we cut more number of trees, what is the result of that? When we cut large number of trees, it will lead to deforestation. So the soil become degraded. The soil become degraded, and cutting up of the trees for timbers, it will make deforestation. Now, when the deforestation has taken place, then can we get a pure oxygen for our survival? No. It makes huge impact on global warming perspective. That is average temperature which is increasing. So hence it is important to understand the carrying capacity of ecosystem. And this carrying capacity of ecosystem depends on three factors. That is amount of resources which are available in that area, size of the population of that region, and amount of resources each individual is consuming. So once you know the carrying capacity of ecosystem, then you can plan. Once you understand the carrying capacity of ecosystem, then you can plan for protecting and conserving of that ecosystem. So that's why this aspect will help us to understand whether the land is degrading, or whether the forest is undergoing large amount of deforestation, or the resources are depleting more and more. So hence we can plan, and we can make impacts, like instead of chemical fertilizers, we can shift to organic farming. Instead of using the water for one time, you can reuse the water, you can recycle the water for the usages. So hence, which will help us to plan and protect the resources. At present, we talk about, take an example of Bangalore. Some 30 years back or 40 years back, the population of Bangalore was ideal, and the resources which could have been supplied by the Bangalore was sufficient for the people to survive. Now, if you see the present scenario of 2024, the population has increased in Bangalore. The population has increased in the Bangalore, and the resources what we are getting from the Bangalore, maybe water or something, what we are taking is have also increased. Now, the population has increased, over exploitation of resources are also there, maybe for industries, maybe for personal issues, or maybe for other activities. Like we talk about groundwater mining, where we are using large amount of water and filling them in the bottles and selling them in the form of what we sell them mineral waters. So we refer that as groundwater mining. So hence over exploitation of the resources we see in Bangalore, then size of the population which has also increased in the Bangalore, and the amount of resources which it can supply. Now Bangalore, is it providing the water for the people of the Bangalore? Is the river which is there, groundwater which is there in the Bangalore, are they providing to the people who are staying in the Bangalore? No. We refer that as it is making collapsing of the ecosystem. It is making collapsing of the ecosystem. So hence understanding the carrying capacity of ecosystem is very, very important. What we get from that, what is the state of that particular ecosystem. So hence at this stage we say the carrying capacity of Bangalore ecosystem is deteriorated, it is degraded. So hence now we are planning that why don't we make watershed management, why don't we make water harvestment, rainwater harvesting, then we can fine on the people who are misusing the water. So this is how the planning can help us to reduce the degradation of the ecosystems. Is it clear? Yes, you can find the same thing where the Punjab, where over exploitation of groundwater has decreased the fertility of the soil, and also the availability of groundwater has been decreased. So in Punjab and Haryana, two things are there: the soil has been degraded and the groundwater has depleted. Very classical example, very perfect one, Ankush. So over exploitation of groundwater in Punjab and Haryana created two problems. One is the soil has become degraded, that is saline soil, and depletion of groundwater. So hence we have to understand these parameters which we refer them as carrying capacity of ecosystem. Then only we can plan, then only we can plan whether we are to make afforestation, whether we are to make rainwater harvesting, whether we are to stop such type of activities, whether we are to regulate the activities, whether you can allow the activities with certain restrictions, right? So hence it is very important for the humanity to understand about the carrying capacity of ecosystem. This can be asked in the mains rather than prelims. It can be asked in the mains, in the mains. Now associated with this, the data says that the world population is projected to reach 9.7 billion by 2050, which will increase the competition for land. It will increase the competition for the land, as the demand for food for the larger population will increase by 56% by 2050. So it means there will be a problem. There will be a problem for agricultural land, as the annual global consumption of all the natural resources is expected to more than 92 billion tons. So hence we find over exploitation will be there. Over exploitations will be there. And that is not only in the context of food and land, it is also in the context of biomass extraction. Biomass extraction, that is the energy aspect, trees aspect, timbers aspects, where it will create large amount of deforestation. It will create large amount of deforestation. And always they are linked with many issues there. So this is something which is a conceptual part. Now you can have a break, then we can start the class at 7 p.m. We'll start the class at 7 p.m. Is it okay? We'll start the class at 7 p.m. or 7:05. 7 or 7:05. Perfect. Okay. 7:05. So as this is a area associated with large amount of facts, don't miss anything. Don't miss anything. Read them, revise them, and facts are very important for your exam point of view. Right. So we'll meet up at 7:05. Okay, welcome back after the break. So hope I am audible as well as visible to you all, right? Please confirm that I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Okay, so we made an effort in understanding the carrying capacity of ecosystem services. They are very important for your mains perspectives. The benefits what you get from the ecosystem. Always remember the process and resources. When the tiger enters into habitats, we refer that as man-animal conflict. We'll see that later. We refer that as human-animal conflict. So we refer that as something called as, yes, it is interspecific fight. You can say interspecific, which is man-animal conflict, because here the tiger has reached to that region because as it does not have sufficient amount of food for its survival. Right. So hence there is an accidental path, what we refer. It is man-animal conflict. Now try to understand a concept here, very significant one. And in this concept, we'll try to understand the terminologies also. Now, keeping all the data as what we have studied. Now, at present, we can say that all living organisms, or any ecosystem, all living organisms or any ecosystem. It can be forest, it can be lake, pond, etc. All living organisms or ecosystems, they always perform or survive. They always perform or survive under the set of environmental conditions. Under the set of environmental conditions. Environmental conditions. Example: temperature, precipitation, that is rainfall, humidity, nature of soil, etc. So all living organisms or ecosystems, they survive under the set of environmental conditions. Now I told what is environment, the physical space surrounding us, we refer that as environment. It can be temperature, it can be precipitation, humidity, etc. All living organisms and ecosystem will survive under the environmental conditions. And these ecosystems, they have highest productivity when the conditions are ideal. They have highest productivity. Highest productivity when the ideal conditions are there. Ideal conditions of environments are there. Like example, again take this, very simple to understand. If you take an example of temperature, if the temperature is 25 degrees centigrade, I'm giving an example. If the temperature is 25 degrees centigrade, then the human beings will perform very well. Their activities will be very strong. Agriculture productivity will also be very high as the temperature is ideal for their growth. I'm giving an example of temperature. Human beings, their efficiency increases when the temperature is ideal. Their works increases. Their productivity increases when the temperature is ideal. The same in the context of rainfall also. If the precipitation is ideal, then the crops will grow. And if the precipitation exceeds and decreases, then they will not be having much impact. So under ideal conditions of humidity, ideal conditions of temperature, I'm not talking about absolute. They vary from one place to another. So these ideal conditions, they vary from place to place. They vary from place to place. The highest temperature and lowest temperature, when we say, they vary from one area to another areas. The average temperature in the hills will not be same as the average temperature in the coastal areas. So these ideal conditions vary from one region to another region. Don't confuse with the absolute values. I'm not talking about absolute values. I'm talking about ideal conditions of temperature, humidity, salinity, everything what we say, their productivity will be very high. their productivity will be very high. Now, when there is change in these ideal conditions, when there is change in these ideal conditions, changes are there. So these changes in the ideal conditions, we refer them as environmental stress. Change in the values. Change in the values. We refer that as environmental stress. Environmental stress. Where the values changes, that is, either they increase or they decrease. The values either they increase or decrease. We refer that as environmental stress, increasing or decreasing the values. Now, ideal temperature is say 25 degrees centigrade. Now, when the temperature increases or decreases in that area, when the temperature increases or decreases in that area, what will happen to the productivity in that region? Productivity of that ecosystem or productivity of living organisms. Will it remain the same? It will increase or it will decrease if the temperature is increasing very high, or if the temperature is falling very low, if the rainfall is very high and if the rainfall is very, very low. So what happens in that case? When the environmental stress is there, when the environmental stress is there, then the productivity of living organism or ecosystem will decrease. The productivity will decrease. Right? Productivity will decrease here. Now understand this. Productivity will decrease when the environmental stress is there. Now, the moment when we talk about the temperature which is increasing, ideal temperature is 25. If the temperature reaches to 30 degrees or if the temperature reaches to 20 degrees, then we adapt to that environmental conditions. Ecosystem also tries to adapt to that. Organism also adapt to that. It resists the changes. So all the ecosystems or living organisms, they always resist the changes. So all the ecosystems or living organisms, they resist the change. Resist the change. And this, they resist the change up to certain maximum and minimum value. Resist the change up to certain maximum and minimum value. Certain maximum and minimum values. Right? Certain maximum and minimum values. They resist the change. And this change which is resisted, it is inbuilt mechanism. It is having with every organisms or every ecosystem. So this is inbuilt mechanism. This is inbuilt mechanism which resist the changes which are taking place in the environment, or they resist the environmental stress. Now, concerned with this, the definition is there. So this degree of resistance, so this degree of resistance which is done by either organism or ecosystem. I'm using the term. This degree of resistance which is done by organism or ecosystem to the environmental stress, to the environmental stress. Degree of resistance to the environmental stress which is done by organism or an ecosystem is referred by a term called as homeostasis. Is referred as homeostasis. Degree of resistance which is done by the ecosystem or organism, and that too within the maximum and minimum value. Within the maximum and minimum value. Within the maximum and minimum value. So this inbuilt resistance to the environmental stress. So when the temperature reaches to 25, 26, we resist that. When the rainfall is more in that area, we resist, we adapt and resist up to some limit. And that adaptation, that resistance, which is done by living organism or by ecosystem within the maximum and minimum value. Within the maximum and minimum value, we refer that as homeostasis, or it is also referred as law of toleration, or law of toleration, or it is also referred as Shepherd's law, or Shepherd's law. All the three terms are the same. Shepherd's law. So all the living organisms or ecosystem, they always have high productivity under the ideal conditions of environment. Under the ideal conditions of environment. Now, when the change in the environmental conditions are there, so these changes in the environmental conditions, we refer them as environmental stress. So the technical term is environmental stress, increasing or decreasing values. The temperature is increasing or temperature is decreasing. Rainfall is increasing or rainfall is decreasing. So this change in the values, we refer them as environmental stress. Now, when the environmental stress are there, the organisms or ecosystem, they have inbuilt mechanism to resist the change within the set of maximum and minimum values. Within the set of maximum and minimum values. And this characteristic is referred as homeostasis, or law of toleration, or the Shepherd's law. Law of toleration or Shepherd's law. We refer this as homeostasis. All the three terms are the same. Now, keeping these things in the mind, if you put a graph, of, here we talk about the graph. This is called as productivity of ecosystem or productivity of organism. And here we are having ideal environmental values, like temperature, precipitation, etc. This side we refer them as maximum values, and this side it is referred as minimum values. Maximum values and minimum values, right? Now, all the ecosystems or organisms, they perform maximum when the ideal values are there. So hence we find this is the maximum value where they perform. And as the values decreases or as the value increases, their productivity decreases. I'm repeating, as the value increases or as the value decreases, their productivity decreases in both the cases. In both the cases, their productivity will decrease. Right? And this is called as maximum and minimum values. So this area, this is a region, or this is a condition where the ecosystem survive, survive within the set of maximum and minimum values. Minimum values. We refer that as homeostasis, law of toleration, or we also refer them as Shepherd law. Shepherd law. And this is also referred as ecological amplitude. It is also referred as ecological amplitude. And always remember, the ecological amplitude is represented by a graph which is referred as bell shape. It is represented by a graph which is bell shaped. Bell shaped. So this is what you should remember in the terminologies. Ecological amplitude is same as homeostasis, is same as law of tolerance, is same as Shepherd's law. So all the three are same. Homeostasis, law of toleration, or Shepherd's law, all are referred as the ecological amplitude. So they are also referred as ecological amplitude. All the terms are same. All the terms are same. Is it clear? So please remember the terminologies. Homeostasis, law of toleration, right, and Shepherd's law. Is it clear? Now here, when we talk about minimum and maximum, so minimum and maximum values are here. Let me complete this. Minimum and maximum values are there. Productivity can be minimum and maximum. So within that, the ecosystem survive. Within this, the ecosystem survive. Within the set of maximum and minimum values. Within the set of maximum and minimum values. Now, keeping this thing in the mind, keeping all the ecosystems survive in the maximum and minimum values. Now, when we want to define the ecosystem, so which word is perfect to define an ecosystem? A stable ecosystem or permanent ecosystem? Which word is very perfect to classify the ecosystem? Can we say the ecosystem as stable ecosystem, or can we say the ecosystem as permanent ecosystem when you take about the conditions of environment perspectives? Most of the answers, almost all 90%, we say it is stable. So hence we say all the ecosystems are stable, they are not permanent. Perfect. So hence we say all the ecosystems can be referred as stable. The ecosystems are not permanent, they are stable. So it means their stability is within the set of maximum and minimum value. Do you agree with this? So their stability is within the maximum and minimum value. Their stability is within the maximum and minimum value. Stability with maximum and minimum value. So hence we say all the ecosystems are under dynamic equilibrium. So hence we say all ecosystems are under dynamic equilibrium. Yes, maximum stability, we can say. Perfect, maximum stability. So hence we say they all are under dynamic equilibrium. So this is some rough idea about the ecosystems. Now, last point here. Now, when you talk about the ecosystem, all the ecosystems are under dynamic equilibrium. Now, we come across certain events. Events like earthquake, volcanic activity, forest fires, drought, heavy rainfall, we say cloud bursting. Heavy rainfall, cloud bursting, etc. So when the events like earthquake, volcanic activity, forest fires, drought, cloud bursting, etc. are there. So when these events happen, so don't you think that they will alter the maximum and minimum values? They will exceed the maximum and minimum values. So these conditions makes the values to increase beyond the maximum and minimum. So these events will disturb the equilibrium of ecosystem. So these events, they make the environmental values to exceed beyond the maximum and beyond the minimum. Now when the droughts are there, the water will not be sufficient, so the values will decrease below the minimum values. When large amount of forest fires are there, the temperature and all will exceed beyond the maximum limit. So this events, they will disturb the ecosystem. They will disturb the ecological amplitude. Now what will be the end result when the equilibrium is destroyed? What will be the end result when the equilibrium of an ecosystem is destroyed? What happens when the values becomes more than maximum, more than minimum, or less than minimum, more than maximum? Then that ecosystem will collapse. This ecosystem will collapse. Ecosystem will collapse. So reduced production is different, but understand the concept here. So that ecosystem will collapse. Why? Because all the ecosystems are under dynamic equilibrium. Any event like earthquake, volcanic activity, fire, etc., will disturb the ecological equilibrium, and that will lead to collapse of ecosystem. So that's why we say all the ecosystems are stable, but they're not permanent. Even the earth is not permanent. Even the God is not permanent. So when the earth is not permanent, when the God is not permanent, then how our sorrows are permanent, right? Our sorrows are also not permanent, right? Misfortunes are also not permanent. Happiness is also not permanent, right? So we say at best as stable conditions. So nothing is permanent in the universe. Nothing is permanent on the universe. Earth is also not permanent. If you have seen that before Himalayas, there was a Tethys Sea, and Tethys Sea was replaced by Himalayas. Now, can we say Himalayas are permanent mountains? No. We say Himalayas at present are the stable mountains. Maybe after millions of years, the Himalaya can also erode. Himalaya can also erode. So hence, nothing is permanent on the Earth's surface. The Earth itself is not permanent. So hence, how we can say the ecosystems are permanent, right? So all the ecosystems are stable, and we refer them as a dynamic equilibrium. And all the ecosystem performs very well under the conditions which are referred as maximum and minimum values. If the values increases beyond the maximum, the ecosystem will collapse. And if the values decrease below the minimum, then the ecosystem will collapse. Ecosystem will collapse. Coral bleaching is an example of this. Yes, coral bleaching is one such example. If the coral bleaching continued for a longer period of a time, then what will happen to the corals? They will die. They will die. So coral bleaching is a response to the global warming, right? Yes, we can say the same thing. Yes, we can say the same thing, right? So it means that sometimes when we say tipping points, so it means that tipping points are nothing but the maximum values. So when the maximum values exceeded by the environmental stress, then that will lead to the collapse of ecosystem. You should remember in the context of ecosystem. Yes, we can say rather than sweet spot, you can say tipping points. Tipping points is more ideal. You can say tipping points. So maximum and minimum, say 25 degrees, as I told. If the temperature reaches to 40 degrees, then we can't survive. If the temperature reaches to 10 degrees, then we can't survive. So hence, if anything is more than or less than the maximum values and minimum values, then the whole ecosystem will collapse. So after this minimum and after this maximum, that is 0. So here we are having 0. So no living species you will find here. No living species you will find here. So here remember the term, something called as ecological amplitude, dynamic equilibrium, and homeostasis, law of tolerance, and Shepard's law. So these are the terms which you should remember. The terms which you should remember, right? So very important concept, right? Now, the last discussion of this is, understand this, linked with the whatever we have discussed, linked with that, the discussion is, now we are having two ecosystems. This is ecosystem A, ecosystem B, and they are nothing but the forest ecosystem, ecosystem A and ecosystem B. So two areas are there. Now in the both forest ecosystems, the first event is large amount of felling up of trees, deforestation has been done here. Deforestation has been done in both the areas. It means the forests have reduced in the number. Cutting up of forest is done, or felling of the trees. Cutting up the trees or felling up of trees are there. Now this forest is under the threat, and this forest is also under the threat, where they are reducing. Now understand that discussion. Now in the ecosystem A, where the deforestation has taken place, the first event, the deforestation, cutting of trees there. The second event in this is, this area is affected by drought. And the second area where we find instead of drought, more plantation of trees are done. Plantation of trees is done, or afforestation is done. Afforestation is done in these areas. Now, what will happen to the first forest, ecosystem A, where the deforestation is there? Already it will make the conditions which are affected by the drought. So what will happen to the forest ecosystem A? So when it is beyond the maximum capacity, it will collapse. So this ecosystem A will collapse. Now what will happen to the ecosystem B? It is cutting up of trees was there, and where we have made plantation or afforestation of that. So will it collapse? It will come back into normalcy. So this event will bring the ecosystem into normalcy. Right. Now, associated with this, understand the term. One event is supported by another event. Both are responsible for collapsing of ecosystem. So one event is supporting or accelerating the other event, and which lead to collapsing of ecosystem. We refer this as positive feedback mechanism. Where one event is supporting the another event, and both are making the ecosystem to collapse. We refer that as positive feedback mechanism. Now in the second case, here we find one event. Is it supporting the other event or nullifying the other event? So deforestation and afforestation, is it supporting or nullifying? Perfect. So one event is nullifying or reducing the impact of other, nullifying or reducing the impact, and by that it is bringing the ecosystem into normal condition. It brings the ecosystem into normal condition, and we refer that as negative feedback mechanism. We refer that as negative feedback mechanism. So please understand these things. So positive feedback mechanism and negative feedback mechanism. Positive and negative feedback mechanism. Is it clear? Now, try to answer this. In the present context of 2024, where we are having the issue of global warming and climate change, we are having the impact of global warming and climate change. Now, using of fossil fuel and using of clean energy, two possible ideas are there. Using of fossil fuel and using of clean energy. Now, using of fossil fuel, is it a positive feedback mechanism or negative feedback mechanism? Using of the fossil fuel, it is using of fossil fuel in the present context of global warming and climate change. It is referred as the positive feedback mechanism. Positive feedback mechanism. Because already the global warming is more, and if you use the fossil fuel, it will accelerate, and that will make the collapsing of the ecosystem. And usage of the clean energy, this is called as the negative feedback mechanism. Right. So this is what you should remember in the context of any. Now, if you are talking about the polar regions, Arctic and Antarctica. Now, melting of Arctic ice in the North Pole, is it positive feedback mechanism or negative feedback mechanism? And why it is referred as that? The melting of Arctic ice. Is it positive feedback or negative feedback mechanism? Perfect. It is called as positive feedback mechanism. Now, why it is referred as positive feedback mechanism? Because when the ice melts, what will happen? This is based on your geography and current affairs. Right. So when the Arctic ice melts, yes, so that will have huge impact. On the other parts. Plus, what will happen to the albedo in the Arctic region? What will happen to the albedos in the Arctic region? Albedo will increase or decrease the melting of Arctic. So this will have low albedo. Now, when there is low albedo, then that will cause more melting of the glacier. And when the more melting of glacier is done, then that will make the submerged parts, that is, whatever the peats which are there, they are exposed when the ice is melt. So it will accelerate the global warming. Which will make huge impact on the ecosystem. So this is what you should remember. Perfect. This is what you should remember. Global warming, melting of glacier, all these are positive feedback mechanism which accelerates the climate change. Is that clear? So this is what you should remember in the context of the positive feedback mechanism, negative feedback mechanism, and homeostasis plateaus. I hope it is clear. So please read these three sides very carefully. Read them very carefully. First slide, second slide, and the third slide. Read them very carefully. And concern to them is the definitions. So all ecosystems regulate, maintain themselves under the set of environmental conditions. That's what I told. Any environmental stress, any environmental stress means change in the values. Change in the values tries to disturb the normal ecological functions, high temperature, low temperature. And the ecosystem itself tries to resist the change and maintain itself into equilibrium. And this inherent means inbuilt property of all the living organisms or the ecosystem to resist the change is referred as homeostasis. Is referred as homeostasis. Or it is also referred as ecological amplitude or ecological amplitude. Or it is also referred as law of toleration. Or it is also referred as Shepherd's law. Shepherd's law. All the four are the same. All the four are the same. And this is called as the optimum range within which it survives. And this is called as bell shape. Bell shape. Right. And this is called as minimum value and maximum value. So beyond the minimum and beyond the maximum, we don't find anything. So this is called as collapsing of ecosystem. So hence we say all the ecosystems are always referred as dynamic equilibrium. Equilibrium. Right. Now, if you take an example of Amazon forest fire. Right. So Amazon forest is the large forest. Now, Amazon forest fires, the forest fire events in the Amazon, the forest fires in the Amazon, is it positive feedback mechanism or negative feedback mechanism? Amazon forest fire and the global warming phenomenon. So they all are accelerating each other, which is creating positive feedback mechanism. Positive feedback mechanism, right? So these are the terms which you should remember. And the maximum values and the minimum values in which the ecosystem survives is referred as the homeostasis plateau. Homeostasis plateau. Plateau. And within the maximum and minimum values, when the ecosystem recovers, we refer that as a negative feedback mechanism. A negative feedback mechanism always brings the ecosystem into normal condition. Brings ecosystem into normal condition. Normal condition. Right. And the positive feedback mechanism that is below the minimum and above the maximum. Positive feedback mechanism always lead to death or collapse of ecosystem. So negative feedback mechanism brings the ecosystem into normal condition. Yes, so there will be confusion. So here you should remember that positive means one event accelerating the other and both are collapsing the ecosystem. But one event nullifying the other, we refer that as negative feedback mechanism. Right? It is something like this. A person is having diabetes and he is eating more and more sugar, more and more sweet. That is called as positive feedback mechanism, where the diabetic and eating sugar will make the collapsing of the body very fast. A person with diabetes, he is doing exercises as he is taking routine amount of bitter gourd and other, then we refer that as negative feedback mechanism, where he is fighting the bitter gourd exercises are fighting him to bring the body back into normalcy. Is it clear? So we refer them as positive means collapsing, negative means bringing back into normal conditions. Is that clear? Okay. So this is all about the terminologies which we see in the context of ecology and environment. And the definitions are: ecosystems are always in the dynamic equilibrium within the set of maximum and minimum values. Right. And we refer that as homeostasis plateau. And ecological amplitude, limits or range of environmental conditions where the organism can survive and live. So it is also the same. Ecological amplitude is also the same as homeostasis part. Negative feedback mechanism brings the ecosystem into normal condition, and positive feedback mechanism leads to further stress and makes the collapsing of ecosystem. I hope it is clear now. So this is something where you have to be very, very careful. So this is very important for your mains. This is very important for your prelims. And this concept is very significant when the application based questions are there. Application questions are there. Is it clear? So please remember these parts, right? So hence we say that all the ecosystems are not permanent. We say all the ecosystems are, at best we say, stable. All the ecosystems we say they are stable, not permanent, right? So keeping that thing in the mind, we'll try to understand something. Now this is a pond ecosystem. This is a pond ecosystem or lake ecosystem. So in this pond ecosystem or lake ecosystem, we find a river is entering continuously. So this is one type of ecosystem where the lake is entering. So this is a pond ecosystem or lake ecosystem. First ecosystem, pond or lake ecosystem. Now when the river is entering there continuously, this river will fill that lake with the siltation. So this river will fill the lake with siltation. Siltation means sediments. Sediments. Right. So this will make the lake shallow. It will make the lake shallow. Now this is not overnight. It will take hundreds of years. This is hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. Now slowly we find the small plant starts growing in that lake. Now this deposition increases. This deposition increases in thousands of years. In thousands of years. Now slowly we find the plant species increases. So when it is pond like, here you will find fish are dominant, insects are dominant, right? So fish, insects, we refer them as the community of that area. Community means group of species, variety of fish, variety of insects. They make the community. So here the community is different. Slowly we find that the siltation has taken place, right? And sediments are also there. So slowly we find there has been change. Now thousands of years we find. Then again the lake becomes shallow, and here we find the grasses will grow. The grasses will grow. And then we find new species will start to enter here. New species will start entering here. And then we find slowly it is covered by big trees. It is covered by big trees. Now, at one time, we find this ecosystem, pond ecosystem, is replaced. It is replaced by ecosystem B, that is forest ecosystem. Forest ecosystem. So one ecosystem is systematically replaced by another ecosystem. So one ecosystem is systematically replaced by another ecosystem. Replaced by another ecosystem. So when there is replacement of ecosystem is done, so what happens in that? It is not overnight. It has taken thousands of years. It has taken thousands of years. That is time mediated. Time mediated. Thousands of years it has taken. Now pond has been replaced by forest ecosystem. Now, in that, do we find the same community of what the pond has in the forest ecosystem? Do we find the same community? No. So we find there is change in the community. Perfect. So it brings change in the community. Change in the community. Perfect. Now, second, do we find the physical characteristics of the ponds are same as what you find in the forest ecosystem? The physical characteristics, are they same? No. So they modify the physical characteristics. They modify the physical characteristics. So this process where one ecosystem is systematically replaced by another ecosystem in time mediated, and where A is replaced by B ecosystem, where A is replaced by B ecosystem, we refer this as ecological succession. We refer this as ecological succession. Ecological succession. So where one ecosystem is systematically replaced by another ecosystem, time mediated, changing in the community and changing in the physical characteristics, modifying in the physical characteristics. We refer that as ecological succession. Now, here A has been replaced by B. So B is the new ecosystem which is formed. Now, can we say B as permanent ecosystem? Can we say B as permanent ecosystem where A has been replaced by B? No. Again, it is referred as something called as stable. Stable. Now, this B can again be replaced by C. This B can again be replaced by C. Maybe thousands of years. And the C can again be replaced by D. So where one ecosystem is systematically replaced by another ecosystem, we refer that as ecological succession. And whenever ecological succession takes place, the reason may be different. Whenever ecological succession takes place, we always find that there will be a change in the community change in the functions, and this is orderly process. So orderly process of change in the community structure and functions, which is time mediated, which brings the change. So pond ecosystem, the insects, the fish have been replaced by lions, tigers, and big trees, right? So which has changed the physical environment, and that ultimately had led to the stabilized ecosystem, that is A to B. Never mention permanent ecosystem. Never mention permanent ecosystem. It is stabilized ecosystem. Stabilized ecosystem. It can be desert or grassland. Yes, at this stage it can be desert or grassland. Right. Now again, when the forest fire takes place in that, then again that grassland can become a desert area. That can become a desert area. It depends. It depends on which geographical area it is there. So I'm just discussing the process. It can be grassland, it can be forest, or it can be desert area. If no greeneries are there, if only sedimentations are there, then they can create path. Is it clear? So this is some rough idea you should remember. Ecological succession, where one ecosystem is systematically replaced by another in the orderly process. Now this change, the event, if it is by outside factor means like earthquake, volcanoes, we refer that as outside factor. We refer that as allogenic. Earthquake, volcanic activities, we refer that as allogenic. Now, sometimes it is done by community itself, like pandemics, the disease which takes place. Example, pandemic or epidemic disease. Epidemics like plagues, etc. Epidemic means where 90%, 80% of populations are affected. So remember, epidemics means large population is affected. Pandemic means global geographical extent. So pandemic means global extent, geographical extent. Epidemics means large population is affected. large population is affected. We refer that as epidemics. So because of epidemics like plague, example plague, so that entire ecosystem collapses. We refer that as autogenic. We refer that as autogenic. So the ecological succession can be of two ways: by the living inhabitants or outside factors like earthquake, volcano, forest fires, etc. So two ways it can end up. Right. Now here we come across a sequence. Here we come across a sequence. And the sequence which it has taken place, the sequence which has taken place, we refer that as SEER. The sequence is referred as the SEER, a technical term called as SEER. So instead of using the term sequence, we use the term called as the SEER. Right. So this orderly progression of the change, we refer them as the SEER. Orderly, we refer them as the SEER. Now the SEER includes, it includes the four terms. Four terms. The first one is called as nudation. So nudation means creating bare area. Creating bare area or new area. Maybe after earthquake, maybe after volcano, or maybe when the forest fire is done. So creating a bare area, we refer that as nudation. Second one is referred as invasion. Invasion. Yes, we are also responsible for destruction. Human beings are also responsible for destructions. Yes. So invasion. So invasion means it is a successful species which can reproduce. We refer that as invasion. So the species which can successfully reproduce is referred as invasion. Invasion. Right. And this species which is entering for the first time, which is entering for the first time in the created area, we refer that as pioneer. Pioneer species. Pioneer species. That is the second stage, invasion. Then the third one is in the initial stage the resources are more. As the resources are more, so there will be cooperation in the initial stage. Cooperation in the initial stage. Now when the resources become scarce, when the resources become limited, then this cooperation will change into competition. Cooperation and competition. And this competition is interspecific as well as intraspecific. Interspecific and intraspecific. And this competition is for food, water, habitat, etc. Habitat, etc. Right. So we refer that as cooperation and competition, which is referred as the competition exclusion principle. After that, the weaker species are removed out and the strong species will survive and they will create stabilization, or we refer that as climax community. The fourth one is stabilization. Stabilization, or we refer that as climax community. Climax community. Right. So this is what you should remember in the context of the process of ecological succession. All the process of ecological succession, they consist of at least four stages you should remember: nudation, invasion, cooperation, competition, and last one is stabilization, which is referred as climax community. So these are referred as the seers. These are referred as the seers. So the seers includes nudation, invasion, cooperation and competition, and stabilization. Reaction, you can leave that. Reaction, you can leave that. Reaction means how they interact with each other. So these four terms you can remember: nudation, invasion, cooperation and competition, and stabilization. Now climax community means stable community, that is dynamic equilibrium. It is dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium. It may be for 100 years, it may be for 1,000 years. Like the Tethys Sea was replaced by Himalayas. Tethys Sea was replaced by Himalayas, right? So at present, Himalaya is stable. We don't know how long it will survive. Amazon forest is stable. We can't say it is permanent. If the forest fire increases in the Amazon, so one day the Amazon can become a desert area. Amazon can become a desert area. So these are referred as the four stages: nudation, invasion, cooperation and competition, and stabilization in the context of any type of ecological succession. Right. So stable community, we refer them as the stabilization. Is it clear? Now, in the context of succession, we always come across the two types of succession: primary succession and secondary succession. Two types of successions are there. Right. So types of ecological succession. So the first one is called as primary succession. It is creating a brand new ecosystem. It is a brand new ecosystem is created, which is not colonized previously. Not colonized previously. Right. Now it is something like this. Something like this. So this is an ocean. So in the oceans, maybe due to volcanic activity, it has created an island. Due to volcanic activity, it has created an island. So island is completely brand new. Completely brand new. So in this island, which is completely brand new, brand new. So there we find, where we find, slowly the lichens will start growing there. We refer that as, this is called as, when the island is created, we refer that as nudation. So bare area is created. So in this nudation, we find lichens will enter. So that is called as invasion. Nudation, invasion takes place. And then slowly we find small plants and other starts growing there. So that will create cooperation and leads to conflict, cooperation and competition. And ultimately we find the area will be covered by strong community. So in this case, it is big trees. So we refer that as climax community. Climax community. So brand new ecosystem is formed. We refer that as primary succession. Primary succession. A brand new ecosystem is formed. We refer that as primary succession. And here, the series which is involved, the sequence which is involved, we refer this as pre-seer. Pre-seer. Now this ecosystem which is being formed, we refer that as A. Now this A ecosystem which is formed, can we say it is a permanent ecosystem? Can we say it is a permanent ecosystem which is formed here? No. So it means that there is possibility that this E will be replaced by something B. So this A will be replaced by B. And here again, the same series will take place. A will be replaced by B, and here also the same type of series takes place. And this series which takes place is not called as pre-seer. We refer this as sub-seer. We refer that as sub-seer. And we refer this as secondary succession. Secondary succession. Is that clear? Now this B is also formed. B is also a stable. Now this B can be replaced by C ecosystem. Again here series involved. Now when A is replaced by B, we refer that as secondary succession. Now when B is replaced by C, now what we call that? When B is replaced by C, A is primary succession. A is replaced by B, we refer that as secondary succession. Now, if B is replaced by C, then we refer that as any term. Try to answer that. There is no harm if you are answering wrong also. I was expecting that. So it is not called as tertiary. It is not called as tertiary. Don't get confused. It is called as secondary only. So don't get confused. It is secondary only. So don't get tertiary, secondary only. Now, when C is replaced by D, it is not called as quaternary. Again, it is secondary. Even if it is for the nth time, even if it is for 100th time also, then only we will call it as secondary. Then only we will call it as secondary. Is that clear now? Perfect. Right. So hence there are two types of succession, primary succession and secondary succession. So this is called as primary succession. If it is for 100th time also, we refer that as secondary succession only. Right. So this is called as secondary succession. A forest formation from the lake ecosystem, is it a pre-seed or sub-seed? See, already when we talk about lake ecosystem, so lake ecosystem is a one type of ecosystem. So lake ecosystem formation itself is primary. So in that, forest is entering. So that is called as secondary succession. Right. So lake itself is an ecosystem. Before lake, there might be a desert area which has been created by volcanic activity. Now lake has been formed. So in place of lake, the forest ecosystem has been formed here. Is it clear? So this is what you should remember. Secondary successions. Right. So climax community means C. Ecosystem A is replaced by B. So this is called as the climax community of ecosystem B. Stable community, we refer that as climax community. Right. Now, if this is destroyed by forest fire, then it will create a bare area. It will create a bare area, which is called as nudation. Nudation. And then we find invasion takes place. Cooperation and competition takes place. And then it will lead to a complex community called as C. And the C is also having stable community. There is possibility that C can also be replaced by the next ecosystem called as the D. So we refer this as something called as secondary succession. So we refer that as secondary succession. All these are, this is also secondary succession. This is also secondary succession. This is also called as secondary succession. And here, the series which is defined, we refer that as subseed. Secondary succession or old-field succession. So the series which is involved, in the secondary succession, we refer that as the subseed. So pre-seed is primary succession, subseed is secondary succession. Is that clear now? Pre-seed means primary succession. So here, island is there. Now the first ecosystem is formed. We refer that as pre-seed. And we refer that as primary succession. Primary succession. And now this A is replaced by B or C or D. We refer this as secondary succession. And we refer that as subseed. Subseed. Is that clear? Seed means sequence. Seed means the sequence. Right. Now, this is what we refer them as ecological succession. Ecological succession. Right. Now, sometimes when we talk about the terminologies, read them and remember. Nudation, creation of bare area, then invasion, entry of the first successful reproductive species. We refer that as pioneer. Then cooperation and competition. Cooperation and competition. And then we are having something called as stabilization. Climax community, more stable community. And these all are referred as the seeds. These all are referred as pre. If it is primary succession, then we refer that as pre-seed. And if it is secondary succession, we refer that as subseed. Don't get much confused. I think it is clear, right, Garima, that what is subseer and what is preseer? Because these words are very, very important, right? So don't get much confused about them. Perfect. Perfect. Subseer and pre-seers. So remember these things. Now, seer means the series which are involved. Now, this is important for your mains examination. Now, in prelims, there may be possibility of asking the questions. Like, so they can ask match the following. Match the following. Now, here you should remember, if the succession takes place, if one systematic replacement is done by another in the geographical areas, if it takes place in the aquatic habitat, water bodies, then we refer that as hydroseer. We refer that as hydroseer. And if it takes place on the rocky surface, so what is the geological name for rock? Lithosphere. So we refer that as lithosphere. If it takes place on the rock. If it takes place in the dry habitat, then we refer that as xerosphere. Now it is based on the areas where the succession has occurred. Succession has occurred. Is that clear? So it can be the question which can be asked in the prelimination. In the vegetation, it is eosphere. In the saline, we refer that as halophytes, halophytes, haloceres, halophytes, haloceres. So these are referred as something which you should keep in the mind for prelims point of view. Prelims point of view, right? Okay. Now this is all about the successions, carrying capacity, and the benefits what we get from the ecosystem. All our ecosystem from oceans only cause there was, see, whenever when we talk about this in geography, you are studied something called as the first order landform, second order landform, and third order landform. So just reconnect that part. So whenever when you're reading your geography, so in the geography we have come across these terminologies. The first order landforms are the first order landforms which were formed were oceans and the continents. These are called as first order landforms, primary successions which have been these here. Then we come across second order landforms. Second order landforms. So second order landforms are the results of the events which takes place in the Earth's interior. Now, what you call them? The events which takes place in the Earth's interior, like earthquake, volcanic, plate tectonics, convection currents, etc. Right? So they develop a type of a force in the Earth's interior, a force which is developed in the Earth. So generally, when you talk about the heat generated in the Earth's interior, we always talk about something called as the heat which is accumulated since from beginning, radioactivity, and friction. So there are three major sources of heat in the Earth's interior. One is the heat which is accumulated since from the beginning when the Earth was gaseous part. Second one is due to friction when the denser element sinks in the Earth's interior, that is called as friction. Third one is radioactivity, and these three are responsible for generation large amount of heat, and this heat is responsible for generation of the forces, and that forces we refer them as endogenetic forces, and the second order landforms are the result of endogenetic forces. So they are the result of endogenetic forces. Endogenetic forces. Like earthquakes, volcanoes, which we refer them as sudden, which takes more times. Right. Then the third order landforms. Third order landforms are created by the outside factors, which we refer them as exogenetic forces. Result of exogenetic forces. Exogenetic forces. Now here, when we talk about these, so these are referred as the major landforms. Now in these landforms, if the first ecosystem is formed, we refer that as primary succession, and if that is replaced different, we refer that as secondary succession. So please keep this in the mind. Is it clear? right? So I think it is very much clear with reference to the first order landform. Second, don't confuse yourself with first order and second order. You just think that if any existing ecosystem is replaced, then we refer that as the second perspectives, right? Okay. Now we move on to something called as ecological footprint and biocapacity. We'll just make an introduction of this and then we can end up the class. So ecological footprint and biocapacity. So ecological footprint and biocapacity, they are very important concepts. Ecological footprint is referred as demand side, demand side. And biocapacity is referred as supply side, supply side. So it means there is someone who is demanding and there is someone who is supplying. There is someone who is demanding and there is someone who is supplying. Now, who is demanding? It is demand which is made by the human being or humanity. Demand by human beings or human. Now, who supplies that? It is supplied by Mother Earth. Supplied by Earth. So one is demand side and one is supply side. Demand side and one is supply side. So hence we have to measure them. We have to calculate them. So hence ecological footprint and biocapacities are measured or calculated. Calculated every year. Calculated yearly basis. That is the demand side and the supply side. Demand side and supply side. Right. Now, who calculates that? Who measures that? On the global perspective, it is measured by Global Footprint Network. It is calculated by Global Footprint Network. Global Footprint Network, GFN. Is it clear? And both are measured with a unit called as global hectares. They are measured with a unit called as global hectares. So remember, it is yearly basis. It is calculated yearly basis. And it is calculated by Global Footprint Network. And the unit used is called as global hectares. For both, for ecological footprint also it is called as global hectares. And for biocapacity also it is called as global hectares. Right. Now what is ecological footprint? What is demand? So it is very simple to remember. It is a demand which is done by human beings. So ecological footprint is amount of productive land. It is amount of productive land which is required for development of resources to produce resources. So here amount of productive land and water, you can add water. Amount of productive land and water to produce resources. Resources means agriculture, forests, fish, crabs, etc. Produce resources. Produces resources. And after producing the resources, we consume the resources. After producing the resources, we consume the resources. Right. So here, remember, resources means that it talks about forest resource. It talks about the agricultural areas. It talks about habitation, where we make our homes. Habitation. Construction activities, etc. Right. Industries, etc. So we'll set up industries, etc. So amount of productive land where we produce the resources and we consume the resources. And after consuming the resources, the wastes are generated. After consuming the resources, the wastes are generated. Now these wastes which are generated, like carbon dioxide. Now when we eat food, then solid waste is generated, right? Which can be organic type, inorganic type. So wastes are generated in the form of carbon dioxide, in the form of solid waste, etc. Wastes are generated. Now we should assimilate that wastes. So these wastes should be assimilated. Assimilated means absorbed. These wastes should be absorbed or assimilated. Should be absorbed or assimilated. So this amount of land, right, productive land, which is required for development of resources. And after producing the resources, we consume the resources. And after consuming the resources, the wastes are generated. And these wastes, like carbon dioxide, solid waste, etc., has to be assimilated, has to be absorbed. So this amount of land which is required, we refer them as ecological footprint. And the same which is supplied by the Mother Earth, we refer that as biocapacity. So the same which is supplied by the Mother Earth, we refer that as biocapacity. Is that clear? So these two terms you should keep in the mind: ecological footprint and biocapacities. Now it depends on the population, it depends on consumption. It depends on population and depends on consumption. Is that clear? So ecological footprint, demand side, and this is supply side. Now the definition will be the amount of productive land required for construction, pastures, forest lands, right, fishing grounds, agriculture lands, and when we use them, large amount of carbon dioxides are released. So carbon footprint means amount of waste which is generated. Right. So for all these, the productive land which is required, the productive land and water which is required, we refer that as ecological footprint. Productive land and water which is required, we refer that as ecological footprint, which is referred as the demand side. GFN, global footprint networks. GFN, global footprint networks. Don't get confused with P. Footprint. Is it clear? So remember this global footprint network. Now the definition stands is impact of human activities in the terms of biological productive land and water required to produce good, consume, and assimilate the waste generated. We refer that as ecological footprint. Then ecosystem capacity, where the earth supplies them, we refer them as biocapacities. Is it clear? So please remember these things. So it is referred as ecological footprint and ecosystem capacities. We refer them as biocapacities. Two terms are there. One is referred as footprint and one is referred as biocapacity. Global hectare means hectare wise. Just try to read that. So tomorrow I'll explain that part. If you are having any issues, I'll explain. So please reframe your statement, Sakshi. I'm unable to get that. Which language you use, please reframe that statement. So both are calculated in global hectare units. Right. This is something which you should remember. So please read them, understand them, revise them. And I think you are having a webinar, so we'll again discuss this continuation of this tomorrow. We'll discuss the continuation of this tomorrow. Any doubts we are having in between this? Right. So global hectares means which we talk about a particular unit which is used for measurements. Hectares it is. When we say acreage is different, hectares is different. That is geographical unit what you take into consideration. Is it clear? So this is what, don't get much stressed. Don't get much stress. Revise them as simple as possible and follow the PPTs. I'm telling you that if you follow the PPTs, then it becomes very easy. Right. So by this we can conclude the class, and we'll meet up tomorrow again with the same perspective. So small topic is left out, and after that we will start what we refer them as the biodiversities. Take them and we'll meet up tomorrow. Revise, don't get much stress. Whatever books you are having, read them. Keep the PPTs as your skeleton and read them. Don't get much stress. Still 9 more days have to go. We'll make sure that the things will happen in the proper formats. Take care, and we'll meet up tomorrow. Bye bye.